Welcome to Honeybee, real stories of love, lies, and betrayal, where every truth stings. Let's begin. My name is Stephen. The certified mail notice showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. I was wrapping up work when I spotted the postal slip. The following day, I picked up the package, only to find official court papers with my name listed as a defendant in a civil lawsuit. At first, I felt puzzled. Then, as I read further, a cold weight settled in my stomach. The plaintiff was my wife, Helen, except Helen couldn't sue anyone. Helen had been dead for over a year. I immediately called the law firm listed on the paperwork. When I got through to the attorney, I explained there must be a mistake. Helen passed away last year, following complications from what should have been a routine surgery. She'd been buried in Riverside Cemetery more than 13 months ago. The silence on the other end dragged on before the lawyer finally asked me to repeat myself, his composure slipping. He clearly hadn't realized he'd filed a case on behalf of someone who was no longer alive. That call marked the start of one of the strangest and most infuriating legal fights of my life. A battle that proved Helen's grim assessment of her family was right on target and showed me how far greed can push people. Helen died on March 14th, 2023, just 2 days after her surgery. The procedure itself had gone smoothly, but she had an unexpected allergic reaction to a post-operative medication, triggering anaphylactic shock. Despite the medical team's best efforts, her body couldn't recover from the chain of complications. We'd been married for 8 years. Helen was only 34. We shared our home, bank accounts, and everything else couples normally do. She owned a modest stake in a major agrochemical company and had a small retirement account from her previous job. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Helen kept her distance from her family. Her unmarried sister, Susan, and brother, Caleb, lived 2 hours away. In all my years with her, I could count on one hand how often they called or visited. Yet they never hesitated to reach out when they wanted something. Helen often called them leeches, always taking, never giving. Her funeral was small. Susan and Caleb showed up, but they seemed more interested in her belongings and affairs than in mourning. They asked vague questions about whether she'd left instructions for her things. I was too deep in grief to think much of it, assuming they were just processing their loss. Since Helen died without a will, our state's intestacy laws meant everything went to me automatically: our home, joint accounts, and her retirement savings, where I was the named beneficiary. I hired a probate lawyer to ensure everything was done properly, and within months, I thought it was all settled. That's why the lawsuit felt like being hit by a freight train. After calling the confused attorney who'd filed it, I reached out to my probate lawyer. Recognizing the urgency, his secretary fit me in for a meeting 2 days later. When I arrived, still reeling from the absurdity of being sued by my late wife, I explained the claim, a staggering $10 million. My lawyer reviewed Helen's estate file from the previous year and concluded this was a fishing expedition, a baseless suit designed to pressure me into a settlement. He explained that in our state, a surviving spouse inherits everything before extended family, especially when assets are jointly owned. Susan and Caleb had no automatic claim. Our plan was simple: collect proof of our marriage, joint ownership, and Helen's cause of death, then show the plaintiffs had no legal standing. But first, he wanted to know who was really behind this. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. Susan was the lead plaintiff, Caleb a co-plaintiff. Their claims were bold but flimsy, accusing me of taking assets they believed belonged to Helen's estate and should have gone to her blood relatives. They alleged Helen had owned property before our marriage. True, she'd had a condo, but we sold it to make the down payment on our shared home. They claimed her business investments were hers alone, yet her stake in the agrochemical company was bought with our joint savings. Most offensively, they accused me of coercing Helen into changing her will to exclude them, except Helen never had a will at all. They also demanded a share of accounts and retirement funds that were either jointly held or had me listed as beneficiary. Either they'd been badly advised, or they hoped I'd pay to avoid a drawn-out fight. 2 months later, we faced the first court date. Susan and Caleb's lawyer spoke vaguely about inheritance rights, but offered little evidence. My lawyer countered with a stack of documents: death certificate, marriage certificate, deeds, bank records, all airtight. The judge allowed discovery but was already skeptical, questioning their understanding of intestacy law. The discovery phase lasted months, and that's when things took a darker turn. My lawyer requested all documents they claimed proved Helen's separate ownership. Some didn't match county records. A forensic document expert confirmed multiple forgeries, property deeds, bank statements, even signatures altered digitally. We also learned Susan and Caleb had posed as Helen's heirs to her former business partners, tried to redirect quarterly payments, and even attempted to claim a life insurance payout, naming me as sole beneficiary. This wasn't just a civil dispute, it was fraud. My lawyer contacted the district attorney's office. A financial crimes detective took over, and once the criminal angle emerged, Susan and Caleb's attorney withdrew. The case shifted from defending myself to pursuing criminal charges. The final hearing on December 8, 2024, was decisive. My lawyer methodically dismantled every claim, presenting clear proof of joint ownership and exposing the forgeries. The judge dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice and referred the case for criminal prosecution. Susan and Caleb were stunned. They clearly never imagined facing prison. We then filed a countersuit for $38,000 in legal fees plus damages for emotional distress. Meanwhile, the DA charged them with forgery, attempted fraud, and theft by deception, all felonies. Facing overwhelming evidence, they tried to apologize. Susan called repeatedly, claiming it was a misunderstanding. Caleb wrote, blaming her. They offered to pay my legal fees if I'd help drop the charges. I refused. 3 months later, we settled the civil case, $45,000, to cover my costs and damages. The criminal case moved forward separately. The experience proved everything Helen had warned me about her family. They'd shown little interest in her life, but the moment she died, they saw dollar signs. This ordeal taught me that grief and money can bring out the worst in people, and that detailed documentation and a good lawyer can make all the difference. Without records and legal support, I might have lost far more than money. Susan and Caleb counted on my grief to weaken me. They were wrong. The legal system worked. Justice was served, and Helen's memory remained intact. Months later, I look back with both relief and sadness. Relief that the truth prevailed, sadness that her family chose greed over honor. I'm just grateful Helen never had to witness how low they would go. She deserved far better than them.